Welcome to another human-read audiobook by United Marxist Pact Discord server. Link below in the description. In this series, we continue our investigation into the initial construction, the organizational structure, and the principles and tactics of the form of worker organization capable of seizing political power and establishing the revolutionary proletarian dictatorship and communality, which can in turn produce the communist mode of production through the shared class interests of the workers of the entire world. Our goal is to compile, analyze, and elaborate on what all the texts have to say about this, and at the end have a strong understanding of the exact scientific process of it, particularly in general terms. At the end of our readings as a whole, we will try to put it all together and present it as a coherent whole, an educational video with associated notations. Today's reading will be Honorato Damen's 1970 Amadeo Bordiga, Beyond the Myth and the Rhetoric. This is a eulogy, an obituary for Bordiga after he passed. We have a pre-written textual analysis on the terms of the aforementioned topics, which is also posted in the pinned comment if you prefer to read in text, or follow the link in the description to a read-only version of my Google Docs notes. This will summarize the contents of the text, but is no replacement for the actual reading itself for the sake of understanding the context and full content of the piece. In addition, in the reading, I supply my own commentary, critiques, additions, etc., which may be helpful for understanding some particularities. I do not write down things that are repetitious or I feel to be completely inapplicable. In addition, it must be remembered that this is principally critique of an individual and the movement that had built around them and so on and so forth. So this also engages why there's the break between Damen's section and the ICP Il Parito version, which claims to have been descended from Bordiga. Okay, let's get started. We should eschew engagement with bourgeois democracy, as it has historically been shown to produce personal clientism, corruption, and increase the power of opportunists in the party, and thus entrance into it by the party harms its ability to take autonomous action in needs at any time. Fundamentally, the party must be ready at any time to convert to a militarized structure, lead working class action in general, and act as the general staff in the revolutionary moment. However, while engaging in bourgeois democracy harms the party's ability to take action, the sort of organic centralism pressed by variations of the Italian internationalist parties, but not by Bordiga himself, trends towards self-harm. Bordiga recognized the necessity to accept opportunities offered by democracy when it supports the organization and action of developing revolutionary capacity and action of the party. Therefore, the party should instead adopt the more correct position of dialectical centralism, which starts from pressure, however irrational, from below. This pressure is received and rationalized by leadership, converted into concrete political action within the larger party strategy for the party members to carry out and release their drive. I consider this essentially the mass line within the party. In addition, it must be recognized that there is a reason that Bordiga ceased using the word tactics for 20 years, instead using the word strategy. To focus solely on tactics is a minimum program, which leads to inability to look to the future and, under poor circumstances, leads to opportunism. To solely focus on strategy is a maximum program which lacks concreteness, is hypothetical, and leads to conceptions of the conquest of power by the proletariat as an evolutionary struggle. Instead, strategy should dialectically have the ability to overcome the limited and momentary tactical issue of the present and the aims of achieving the concretized strategic goal. And tactical moments can become dialectically valid within the framework of a class strategy under particular conditions, which the wider strategy must strive to create. Fundamentally, revolutionary tactics are dialectically resolved by attaching them to class strategy, and tactics are not attached to class strategy simply act as short-term, immediatism, compromise, and finally opportunism as a result. Any tactic, therefore, needs to be focused solely on improving the ability of the party and proletariat to engage in further struggle. An example of this is the tactic of absenteeism, which must be treated as a tactic, not as a platform, so that the forces of the left can be attracted for actual conflict. The party, under conditions of retreat, applies different tactics in advance. A correct dialectical interpretation does not treat fundamental contradictions like absenteeism and electoralism as a case in point, but rather it looks at the historical motives of a given class in its economic totality, class interest in the base, capacity to carry out action material in the economy, and political totality, class interest in the superstructure, capacity to carry out action in the edifice of the economy. Through this understanding, the party can understand itself, the proletariat, and its enemy, the bourgeoisie. In terms of the party's external relations, it needs to enter into intermediate bodies between the class and party, which act as transmission belts to directly contact the class and lead them in struggle for immediate demands. This creates a permanent condition of relation between the party and the working masses. It allows the party to draw on them in turn. And it is in the struggles of the class drawn towards the party that the party, 1, defines the conditions of the party's existence. The party begins to be able to know itself, understand its position in power, where it can go and can't go. 2, confirms the validity of its ideas. If the party's activity is drawing support from the proletariat, then that shows that its line is more correct. 3, allows for the growth of the party and class. 4, allows for the party to prepare its organs and class to enter into daily struggle and thereby accrue wins and thereby trust. And finally, 5, widen and deepen objective and superstructural possibilities for revolutionary growth. And now I will begin with the full audiobook reading. This will explain the full text that is being summarized here in such a way that you will be able to understand what and why was extracted from it. I hope you enjoy the full reading. This is Honorado Damen's 1970, Amadeo Bordiga, Beyond the Myth and the Rhetoric. Our party has never made a fetish of Bordiga. Even when he was alive, we openly disagreed with some of his principles, but mainly with the way his ideas were deformed by more than a few of his epigons when making use of his names. We are thus in a better position to speak to him of his high stature as a militant, of his untiring work as an organizer, and of his own limitations. As a result, whilst we reject the apologetic tone usually adopted as an obituary, in which Bordiga would have rejected with his usual wisecrack that it was rubbish, we aim to show that it can be accepted and defended because of its contribution to revolutionary theory, and what we don't consider to be in a historic continuity with the international communist left, and particularly that which has come to be known as the Italian left. What we owe to Bordiga. We owe to Bordiga the theory of absenteeism, a tactic articulated in a period of the worst form of parliamentarism based on personal clientelism, corruption, and the jobs for the boys system that germinated in the Socialist Party in the south of Italy. It led to the formation of the absenteeist fraction within the Italian Socialist Party, which created the theoretical practical premise for the revival of Marxist thought degraded by the democratic degeneration and the profound struggle against Parliament, the major bulwark of a corrupt and corrupting parliamentary democracy. We owe to Bordiga the revival of the theoretical framework of scientific socialism, along with the fundamental lines bequeathed by Marx and Engels, reinvigorating the most politically aware of the Socialist Party. This had been crushed in the vice of a social democracy which had led the party into the seats of Montecitorio. This would be the Italian Chamber of Deputies. Parliament, as we found on Montecitorio in Rome. I'm sure I mispronounced that. Continue. Which had Kautsky as its quote-unquote pope, which replaced revolution with evolution, and the dictatorship of the proletariat with the dictatorship of the Giolitian parliament. And footnote, Giovanni Giolitti, that's a Pokemon villain name if I ever heard one, 1842 to 1928, president of the council, 5 times between 1892 and 1921. The strong man of Italy in the years before the First World War, he symbolized the access to power for the generation which had not taken part in the Risorgimento, After, what is this? Unification of Italy. Huh. Okay. After the factory occupation. Oh, wait, what's going on that Marx was talking about in the Civil War in France? Maybe. Something like that was going on. Anyway, after the factory occupations of the Red 2 years, 1920 to 21, he allowed the fascists 35 seats in parliament from his own right-wing bloc, thus opening the door to power for the repressions of the working class. Back to the text. We owe to Bordiga the correct theory of the relationship between party and class on which the success of revolution depends. We can state without fear of exaggeration or contradiction that the definition of such a relationship is a fixed point Marxism, representing a happy fusion between the experience of the Italian left and that of Lenin in the victorious conclusion of the October Revolution. And we must add that what Bordiga produced on party and class not only served as a Marxist reference point to the parties which were being formed in the wake of the October Revolution in the First World War period, but is still a classic and will remain so in the period next proletarian revolutionary wave. To ignore or weaken its terms, even if done in Bordiga's name or some vague approximation to Bordigism, would be to undermine the meaning of the Revolutionary Party and its permanent role of giving a lead in working class action. We need to go back to the platform elaborated at the Congress of Imola, footnote, National Congress of the Communist Fraction of the Party of Socialists of Italy in 1920. Was that in our... Yes, these were on our arenas, which posed the basis for the formation of the Communist Party of Italy at the Congress of Livorno, founding Congress of the Communist Party of Italy, PCDI, in January 1921. To follow the formative steps of a party dynamic from which Bordiga, more and better than anyone else, drew from living experience the objective and subjective facts to elaborate the hysteria of the party in relation to the class. Organic centralism, democratic centralism, we would call it dialectical centralism, in greater coherence with the Bordiga of then, who is for us not the best Bordiga, but the consistent Bordiga. Dialectical centralism because it starts with pressure from below, even if it is irrational, received and rationalized by the leadership, and returns to rank and file to be translated into action in a concrete political way. So this is essentially what you call it, the mass line, only within the party. We're going to add this. We're going to add this, and we're going to add this after reading this next bit. To give credit to a theory of organic centralism and attribute its elaboration to Bordiga, who never recognized its paternity, in the name of an anti-democratic conception, takes us into absurdity and makes Bordiga look ridiculous. He, on the other hand, took responsibility, and not just a formal one, for the Rome theses. Footnote, theses approved at the Second Congress of the PCDI in March 1921. We read that. Which in the part relating to direct and indirect tactics makes explicit the Leninist claim of accepting the opportunities offered by democracy itself in the interests of the Revolutionary Party. How much importance do you give so-called vote counting as a symbol of the democratic method which legitimates the existence in central committees of a majority and minority, which are mechanically linked by this vote? The writer of these lines remembers how Bordiga himself reacted to decisions taken at the last meeting held in Naples. This had to decide whether or not to dissolve the Committee of Intesa, footnote, created in April 1925, to struggle against the Zinoviev-inspired Bolshevization of the PCDI. The declaration of the Committee of Intesa, understanding or alliance, was signed by Bordiga, Bruno Forticiari, Onorato Damen, blah, 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 who are the principal leaders of the PCDI, all members of the historic party left of the party. It was dissolved on the injunction of the Comintern in July 1925. Back to the text. On the preemptory invitation of Zinoviev, first secretary of the Communist International, but a minority, Bordiga, who accepted the dissolution, quote, sic et simpliciter. What does this mean? Why you guys do this? Thus and simply, okay. Actually, he's Italian. This is, if anybody has a right to speak in Latin, it's the Italians, but still, it's all over the place. I hate these. Continuing, perceived with stunned sadness that it was the first time he was in a minority. The words are his own, of the very regroupment of the left which carried his name. Besides being irreverent, not to say laughable, is the way Programma Comunista puts Bordiga alongside Lenin by praising him as, quote, the restorer of Marxism on an even higher level, not through his personal virtues, but given the historical situation, he eliminated the last link with any democratic leftovers, even those which were involuntary, exterior, or linguistically formal. We're going to take this. We're going to take this and put that in there. I want to read this next bit real quick. We have emphasized this extract in order to show their confusing remixing of ideas and methods. The Bordiga's theoretical project is now up in the air, unrelated to reality in a frenzy of idealist subjectivism, a long way from serious Marxist methodology and totally alien to the work and real theoretical framework of Bordiga. We can then understand why defining and legitimizing a certain organic centralism in the way of the main bodies and the life of the Revolutionary Party operate was never a preoccupation of Bordiga, nor practiced by him in his life as a militant. The consequence of this theory is that, in place of a Central Committee elected in a Congress by a democratic centralist method, we would have, for example, permanent commissars who do and undo according to criteria left by the inheritance of Stalinism. Nevertheless, it has to be recognized as easy to retrace in many of Bordiga's writings, as in many of his personal attitudes, insights, and more or less clever and polemical original ideas, which he never followed up with any profound theoretical development through a close examination of the accumulated experience of the workers' movement at any given moment of its long history. And this is the case with quote-unquote organic centralism, which some dubious Marxist epigons tried to twist in a mistaken subjective way, as has already been shown in practice, thus damaging the organization and validity of the Leninist experience. Such damage is not always curable. I point to the Lenin as an organic centralist line. I'm actually going to go back and go through all of these. So I'll see you in a second, people. All right. So absenteeism is a tactic against personal clientelism, corruption, the power of opportunists in the party, and parliamentary democracy and engagement within it by the party corrupts the ability of the party to take action. The party is necessary. It leads the working class action in general, and in the revolutionary movement acts as its general staff. And dialectical centralism starts pressure from below. And Damen presents this as what Bordiga was actually talking about when he was saying organic centralism. This pressure may be irrational, but the leadership still receives it and rationalizes it, converting into concrete political action to release that pressure and presenting it to the party members to carry out. So democracy within the party, when supporting the organization and action of developing revolutionary capacity and action of the party, should be supported. Which is in line with my understanding of Marx as well, by the way. I'm just going to put that out here. Okay, continuing. We owe to Bordiga the reversal of a political tradition of the Socialist Party where the minimum program, that of a tactic, was everything. while it's a maximum program that as a strategy was nothing, reduced to a simple and ritual enunciation of a hypothetical, vague conquest of power by the working class via the law of evolution. The theory dear to reformists of the right pair which falls on its own. Like any change, it had at times a paradoxical aspect, where an absolute negation was replaced with an affirmation just as absolute. This is also true of Bordiga. The term quote unquote tactic disappeared from his writings to be substituted by that of strategy. It gave the impression of reducing the dialectic to two fixed contradictory terms, although for Bordiga it was the only, if drastic, way of really breaking the reformist tradition of political thought and practice. This put the accent on strategy, which dialectically has within itself the possibility of overcoming the limited and momentary tactical issue of the present, and the fuller and more real vision of the strategic event of the future. This is speaking directly to my criticisms, by the way, in that all the things that I was criticizing about Bordiga are being respoken. Thank you, Damen. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. All right. To solely focus on tactics is a minimum program. This leads to the inability to look to the future and under poor circumstances leads to opportunism. This isn't explained in this, but I want to put that out there because if you're just looking at the immediate right here, right now, constantly, even if you're comparing it to a well-written program, which essentially informs tactical action, if you don't have a long-term strategic format and aim, then you're kind of going to just be paddling in the water and going around in a big circle. To solely focus on strategy is a maximum program. This lacks concreteness, is hypothetical, and leads to conceptions of the conquest of power by the proletariat as an evolutionary struggle. You're basically just constantly looking to the future, and you're not taking the immediate actions that are necessary to carry out what's necessary to get to the condition wherein you can achieve your strategic goals, because usually it's going to be okay, you got your I don't want to get into military theory because I'm not familiar enough with it, but essentially there's also even something missing here because it's not just tactics, it's also like yeah, so you got your strategic, operational, and tactical goals, right? And you know, this is even complete this stuff is even completely missing the operation section of it. I think that operational in these terms is kind of just eaten up by tactical and strategic. Um, so, and you know, maybe there's a reason for that, but I'm not sure. Anyway, continuing. From personal experience, we can draw on wait, did I finish reading this? No, I didn't. So to focus solely on strategy is a maximum program. This lacks concreteness, is hypothetical, and leads to conceptions of the conquest of power by a proletariat as an evolutionary struggle. Strategy should dialectically have the ability to overcome the limited and momentary tactical issue of the present and the aims of achieving the concretized strategic goal. Back to the text. From personal experience, we can draw on two episodes which are illuminating and particularly significant to understand how the tactical moment becomes dialectically valid within the framework of a class strategy. We are talking here of the indications indirectly given by Bordiga as soon as he was thrown out of the leadership of the party of Livorno by the new Gramsci Togliatti center. So this says Palmiro Togliatti, a former ordinavist, he became the henchman of Stalin. Under the name Ercole, he was an executioner of the working class during the Spanish Civil War, 1963 to 9, or 1936 to 9. He became general secretary of the PCDI after Gramsci was arrested and sent to the islands off Sicily, where he joined Damen and Bordiga. He returned to Italy as head of the renamed Italian Communist Party, PCI, which he headed until his death in 1964. Back to text. regarding the line to be taken inside and not outside, the parliamentary circus, in a situation of profound disarray provoked by the assassination of Matteotti. Footnote: Giacomo Matteotti, 1885 to 1924, secretary of the PSU, Unitary Socialist Party, a right-wing split from the Socialist Party. He was assassinated in June 1924 by a fascist group shortly after denouncing the Mussolini government. Back to text. This wasn't a moral question, he counseled, nor a question of a parliamentary secession of the Aventine type. Footnote: on the 27 June 1924, the Matteotti assassination provoked a protest reaction, which took the name the Aventine Succession, referring to a history of ancient Rome when the plebeians revolted against the patrician senate by taking themselves onto the Aventine Hill in 449 BC. By some deputies of the democratic quote-unquote opposition who refused to take their seats. For several weeks, the Mussolini government seemed on the point of collapse in the face of a wave of indignation across the country. Bordiga and the left communist tendency opposed this absenteeism. He demanded that the party struggle for the last time using quote-unquote revolutionary parliamentarism. Reposi, a member of the left of the party, returned to the parliament to denounce Mussolini's cops in the name of the PCDI. For the Italian left, if parliament was historically no longer an arm which the workers could use in the 19th century, here they were still a means to oppose all the factions of the capitalist class, whether Democrat or fascist. For the Italian left, it was necessary to show that the only effective way to stop fascism was to fight for the proletarian revolution. Okay, back to the text. Following the Democratic parties and the illusion that fascism could be fought in the name of a bourgeois morality, offended by vicious assassination, or in the name of the defense of Parliament as the institutional guarantee of real democracy, or even in the name of the defense of the royal institutions and the prerogatives of the Savoy monarchy. Footnote: Italy was united in the 19th century under the Kingdom of Piedmont Sardinia, headed by the House of Savoy. Okay. Back to text. This line of conduct, reluctantly followed by the party center, slowly and in zigzags, was devised and developed in Bordiga's house and echoed in the speech which Grieco read in the Chamber of Deputies. This is the same Grieco who, until then, was a chosen disciple of Amadeo, and who a few months later would become the quote-unquote implacable enemy of the Italian left. So, Ruggiero Grieco, at first a member of the abstentionist fraction after Bolshevization, he became a Stalinist. Damen has had a memory lapse here. It was Reposi and not Grieco who returned to the Chamber of Deputies. Luigi Reposi was elected a member of the executive committee of the PCDI in 1921. He was expelled from the party in 1929, as would Bordiga, Damen, and Forticiari in the period 1930 to 33. After the war, the Forticiari he played an intriguous role in the PCI of Togliatti. Bordiga never forgave him and refused to see him even on his deathbed. Thank you, footnotes, for that correction. This line was most significant for the anti-fascist tactic of the party leadership. Faithful to the policy of the Russian state, it ended up lining up the party on one side an imperialist war. In its theoretical justification for this, it distorted of Lenin's theory of imperialism in a shameful and vulgar way. It so doing, it undermined the activity of the Revolutionary Party, which is to oppose imperialist war by transforming into a class war, an ideology and task which only the communist left defended then and continues to defend today. Okay. The second tactical experience, understood as part of a strategic aim, took place at the heart of the internal crisis of our party. Footnote: in 1952. From its foundation, the reason of being of our party, as it still is, was not to attempt a polemic address to the PCI from the outside to address its ideological deviation and opportunism, or rather to establish a revolutionary party from within the Italian left at a time when this was objectively missing. The disagreement mainly concerning the way of looking at the union and factory organizations which we consider to be indispensable for a revolutionary party because they not only relate to the class, but the need to increase the number of cadres capable of carrying out its basic tasks, which the others argued was a left social democratic party practice, equals which party policy should reject. Bordiga, who never joined our party, footnote, Bordiga did not join the International Communist Party between 1944 and 1952, but he did write a series of articles called Sul filo di tempo, on the thread of time, in the party theoretical journal Prometeo. Continuing. But theoretically collaborated with in a serious way, though not as an active militant, decided to take part in the debate. He defended the view that intermediate bodies, union organizations, are needed between the party and the class. These are the famous transmission belts without which the party would lack an instrument for directly contacting the class which the unions organize and lead in their struggles for demands. That is to say, they have nothing to do with the specific tasks of the Revolutionary Party, but is above all the existence of these intermediary bodies between the party and the class that creates a first and permanent condition for the party to be able to draw the working masses and their struggles towards it. Such struggles define the conditions of the party's existence, confirm the validity of its ideas, and create the possibility of its growth at the same time as that of the class as a whole. Through them, the party can prepare its political instruments and human material in order to join in the daily struggle and thus increase and deepen it in order to raise the particular and immediate to the universal. In other words, widening and deepening the objective and superstructural possibility for revolutionary growth. This intervention had a small echo at the time amongst comrades who were disgusted by union activity with the real animosity of neophytes. But once a split had taken place in the internationalist organization, the U-turn, which we all know about, then took place without any critical justification, which a change of position of this type would normally merit. Okay, we're going to add this. And also I wanted to scroll up and add this a little bit down at the bottom of this. Okay. All right. So the party needs to enter into intermediate bodies between the party and the class, which act as transmission belts to directly contact the class and lead them in struggle for immediate demands. This creates a permanent condition of relation between the party and the working masses and allows the party to draw on them in turn. The struggles of the class drawn towards the party defines the conditions of the party's existence, knowing itself, confirms the validity of its ideas, allows for the growth of the party and the class, allows the party to prepare its organs and allows the party to prepare its organs and the class enter into daily struggle and accrue wins and thereby trust. Widen and deepen objective and superstructural possibilities for revolutionary growth. Okay, back to the text. Where were we? Here we go. It's worth recounting that the two episodes to show how carefully Bordiga, and with him the Italian left, confronted and resolved the difficult problem of revolutionary tactics both in the realm of theory and in its practical application, in order to expose the myth, if it was needed, of a Bordiga, in a left wing of the party, incapable of grappling with tactical problems. What is true about this accusation, so dear to Gramsci and to Togliatti of the time of their tireless and dark attacks on the leadership of the Communist Party of Italy in 1923, to have the left replaced, a substitution which took its place is worth repeating, not through the decision of the party membership, which was then overwhelmingly on the left. Footnote, in May 1924, at the clandestine Congress of Como of the PCDI, we read this, the left still had an overwhelming majority over the right, Tosca, and the center, Gramsci. It was slowly removed from leadership of the PCDI between 1923 to 6 by bureaucratic measures with support of the Communist International and its emissaries, most notably Jules Humbert Draws and the and Manulitsky. Back to text. But by virtue of the new Russian policy to which the Center of the Third International conformed in every aspect, even meddling in the internal activities of the parties of the single sections of the International, is that the left has always openly and resolutely opposed tactics as such. In other words, tactics which are detached from any class strategy. The left openly and resolutely opposed the short-term, immediate tactics of Gramsci and Togliatti, which made the Communist Party of Italy the party of systematic compromise, as well as pursuing the useless policy of Italian peaceful path to socialism. Footnote: policy of narrow horizons limited to legal reformism and permanent compromises with capital. Okay. Up to now, we have briefly examined in an objective way what Bordiga, the militant revolutionary, passed on in the way of a body of thought and lessons. These are born out of an experience which covered a period of struggle which was one of the most intense in the revolutionary movement. This experience undoubtedly shaped the inheritance of the Italian left and therefore the Revolutionary Party. We would, however, be in dereliction of our duty as militants of a revolutionary party if we were not also objective in analyzing the limits of his thoughts and personality. We cannot remain silent for sentimental or supposed political opportunist reasons on what in the work and attitude of our comrade we consider contradictory and deviation from our tradition. Yeah, so we're going to grab this real quick. All right, so revolutionary tactics are dialectically resolved by attaching them to a class strategy. If they aren't, then they aren't revolutionary. Tactics that are not attached to class strategy simply act as short-term immediatism and compromise, as to say, opportunism. Any tactics need to be focused solely on improving the ability of the party and proletariat to engage in further struggle. Bordiga's limitations. Bordiga lacked a true evaluation of the dialectic because the basis of his education was largely based on scientific facts. Footnote: Bordiga was a qualified engineer and always maintained an interest in what was scientific and rational, which led him to see the world and life on the level of rational development when the reality of social existence and of revolutionary struggle often poses a world of good part of which obeys irrational impulses. The methodology based on mathematical certainties, which belongs to science, is not always in agreement with a methodology based on the dialectic, which is movement and contradiction, and this, when it comes to analyzing revolutionary politics and perspectives, is no small matter. It is in the light of this underestimation of the dialectical method in the Marxist sense that we identify the reasons for the futility of the Bologna Congress 1919, and we did, in fact, read through that. I believe this would be, what's it here? Platform. It sounds familiar. Sorry. Anyway, in terms of achieving a fundamental clarity about reality and the immediate perspectives for the Socialist Party, it was practically finished as a party of revolution, though live and kicking as a parliamentary body, and there is a need to work in that Congress for the formation of a new party, either through a split by those who are in favor of revolutionary action, or by coming together of the revolutionary left inside the old structure to wait for the right moment to make the break. This is both a necessary and sufficient condition to bring into being an ideologically and organizationally mature Communist Party, which could take on the role of spur and guide to the working class whilst a revolutionary outcome was still possible. At Livorno in 1921, the situation had already changed and the forces of the working class were in fact in retreat under pressure of the fascist reaction. Bordiga himself, who took on the major responsibility for the theoretical and political orientation of the abstentionist left, didn't understand that at Bologna, and not later, a start should have been made in building the Communist Party. Such a historic endeavor demanded a platform which should not have had a tactical expedient like abstentionism as its essential component, but a platform, not unlike that of Lenin's party, which attracted around it the forces of the left ready to fight for the proletarian revolution. In such a healthy abstentionism would have been able to play a significant role. Sorry. In such a party, abstentionism would have been able to play a significant role, even not a preeminent one, in acting as a healthy antidote to the rapidly growing electoralism of the worst type. All right, so the distinction between the sorry. Okay. Well, I'll just take my notes and then I'll talk about. All right. So the abstentionist position was correct, but in 1919, rather than staying within the party, either they should have split entirely or created the basis for the future split. This split was necessary to create an ideologically and organizationally mature Communist Party and would have allowed for proper action against the fascist reaction by the party, had been carried out in the party and not been retreat. The party, under conditions of retreat, needed to be able to treat abstentionism as a tactic, not as a platform, so that the forces of the left could be attracted for actual conflict. I think that's the way to read this. Continuing. A correct dialectical interpretation does not pose a question in terms of fundamental contradictions, as in case in point electoralism and abstentionism, in terms of the historical motives of a class and its economic and political totality. The proletariat, the subject, is the class opposed to those who rule it, the bourgeoisie, capitalists. That puts it quite succinctly. Essentially, right. So the party should focus on the historical motives of a class in its economic totality, which would essentially be the class interests within the base and its political totality, class interests within the superstructure. Through this understanding, the party can understand itself, the proletariat, and its enemy, the bourgeoisie. And in this sense, right, fascism makes perfect sense. And you don't have to get into questions of electoralism versus abstentionism in those cases. All you have to do is understand, okay, the bourgeoisie are going to engage in their class conflict within these spheres in these ways. And we need to prepare for that in whatever way happens to be most effective at any given period, while under the strictures of the larger strategic class struggle, right? And abstentionism is obviously a key part of that. The recognition of the need to reject alignment with any sort of bourgeois organizational principles and so on and so forth. This is an obvious thing that would be the result of it. However, if one just goes in and makes it about abstentionism versus electoralism, then you miss the larger things at play, which is the actual economic and political totality. Essentially, step back, look wider, and then from there you can look more directly. Anyway, continuing. This period of Bordiga's personal and political life practically ended with the ejection of the left from the leading bodies of the party, and as a result the compulsory end of Bordiga's leadership. But above all, it was the consciousness of the collapse of the Third International as the center of leadership of the world revolution which brought about in Bordiga that psychopolitical trauma which accompanied him for more than 40 years until his death. Footnote: from his exclusion from the PCDI in 1930 until his death in 1970. Back to text. Inferiority complex which prevented him from putting out of his mind the butchery of that enormous international organization which collapsed so suddenly on top of those who believed in its continuity and force with a certainty which had more of a mystical than the scientific. This would be the conception of the invariant program. His political behavior, his constant refusal to take on a politically responsible attitude, has to be considered in this particular climate. Thus, many political events, some of great historic importance, such as the Trotsky-Stalin conflict, and Stalinism itself, were disdainfully ignored without an echo. The same was true for a fraction abroad in France and Belgium. The ideology and the politics of the Party of Livorno, the Second World War, and finally the alignment of the USSR with the Imperialist Front. Not a word, not a line on Bordiga's part appeared throughout this historic period, which was on a wider and more complex level than the First World War. By contrast, the First World War had offered to Lenin the objective basis for a Marxist analysis condensed into imperialism as the highest stage of capitalism and the state and revolution, pillars of the revolutionary doctrine and theoretical premises of the October Revolution. So we're not going to write this down because this is personal to Bordiga. But essentially what he's saying is that Bordiga didn't properly analyze and critique. We had to wait for the end of the war and a fascist experience to reestablish real contact with the comrades and members of the organization who still remained. First of all, there was contact with Bordiga to let us know what he was thinking on the major issues and what he intended to do as a communist militant. It wasn't a case of asking Bordiga to assume responsibility at the center of the party. Even if his support as advisor and quote-unquote anonymous collaborator of the party was full and constant when he was not being inspired by a general political orientation, which was not always in tune with that of the party. His way of speaking diverged from ours, even if his method of analysis was more or less as always. He maintained that we should not speak of the Russian economy in terms of state capitalism, but of state industrialism, not of a socialist October Revolution, but of an anti-feudal revolution, and therefore of an economy which was tending towards capitalism. But he did not seem greatly convinced of what he was saying, and the corrections he brought into his thinking a short time later seemed to confirm this. And then was the reason for an ideological cover so fragile and so obvious contradiction with his past, and above all with the points of the platform of the Italian left, which were developed by Bordiga himself. We don't want to get involved in a psychopolitical drama where the main component is fear and even and above all physical of a rupture of the past which he had built with his consciousness, even more with his intelligence and creativity, the masterpiece of his political life lived so intensely in the 1920s. The label state capitalism had a class significance. State industrialism did not. He thus left things as they had been or as he wanted them to be. So essentially he's saying, okay, Bordiga had abandoned the Russian Revolution and claimed that it was an anti-feudal revolution and not a not an anti-capitalist one, not a socialist revolution to establish a dictatorship of the proletariat, so that he could essentially make it be the case that the socialist revolution never really happened. And it wasn't the case that the things had just degenerated so far with Stalin's and frankly the later years of Lenin's rule, right? Where the dictatorship fell apart. It ceased being a dictatorship of the proletariat. Okay, continuing. This is why we think it is a positive thing to return now to these debates with a more mature and perceptive experience than we could have had in the 1940s or so. A late and not very convincing justification of the theory of state industrialism reappeared also almost incidentally in Programma Comunista number 3, February 1966, from the same author. We copy from the article, quote, "The New Enterprise Statute in Russia," end quote. Quote, "First remark, the statement that state enterprises are principal links implies the existence of non-state enterprises and, as a result, private activity in the vulgar sense of the term, and reconfirms our old assumption against state capitalism in Russia, which we recognize rather a state industrialism. Other links exist, other firms in the Russian economy which compete in the economic process," end quote. The justification which the author gives it for it not only confirms our analysis at the time, but clearly demonstrates the fact that his impression in relation to the nature of the Soviet economy was essential to him. It was useful for hiding the political desire to reject. We say then because that's where the evidence comes from. Any rigid class formulation like state capitalism, and to which all the theoretical and political framework of the Internationalist Communist Party had been linked since it was founded. The theoretical justification he gives us borders on the limits of banality, if by this he aimed to create a new economic category which had never existed before, either in the limits of the capitalist economy or in the experience of the first phase of the social state. This phase of development of the capitalist economy was clearly outlined in Engels in his masterly Anti-Düring. Quote, the transformation of the great establishments for production, distribution, and joint stock companies, trusts, and state property show how unnecessary the bourgeoisie are for that purpose. All the social functions of the capitals are now performed by salaried employees. This is not end quote. This is not a quibble over words, but a political judgment of fundamental importance if there is a will to take the Revolutionary Party down a clear and coherent path in the face of the most disconcerting problems in the post-war world. The statement that the state enterprises act as principal links in the national economy implies the existence of non-state enterprises and consequently private activity, which is characteristic of the entire unequal development of capitalism right up to its period of maximum development. It also brings the lower phase of socialism, which increases the power of its state capitalism, quote unquote, and overcomes it in the dialectical form of the socialist state gradually getting rid of capitalist and pre-capitalist relics into state enterprises, which the revolution has inevitably dragged behind it in the historic course of building a socialist society. Okay, we're going to add this to our extra quotations in the communist mode production to the dictatorship of the proletariat. And then continuing, and it is this type of state capitalism which Lenin conceived, and which the later strengthening of the socialist sector would have to overcome and win over within the framework of a revolutionary power, where the greatest guarantee was the exercise of the political dictatorship of the armed proletariat. But the nature of the state capitalism which this revolutionary party was faced with in the midst of the Second World War and in the immediate post-war period, this is what happened at the center of our organization, and to which this note refers, was radically different and had very different characteristics which we would like to quickly examine, even if compelled to be brief. State capitalism under Stalin did not trend towards socialism, but towards the consolidation of the power of the traditional capitalism in the form of strongly centralized state enterprises, made possible by the passage of the private industrial economy into the orbit of the state, set up by the October Revolution. The insertion of the USSR in the Second World War had no element of socialist justification, besides, not getting all murdered, but I just want to say that. But on the other hand, thousands of bourgeois justifications of a capitalist nature, with obvious imperialist implications, as the Yalta Conference between Stalin, Roosevelt, and Churchill in 1945 would later show. This is entirely correct. The aftermath of the war, when when everything settled and, the USSR was no under the threat of having a Lebensraum and being just wiped out of existence. Not just the nation or the socialist revolution, but the very people themselves, because the Nazis had specific aims at wiping out the Slavic people, etc. Afterwards, things really quickly showed themselves as developing into a profoundly imperialist character. Continuing. This placed Russia amongst the great beneficiaries in the share out of the war booty. They had no business demanding reparations from the GDR, for instance, but they did. It's the same unscrupulous tactical elasticity which saw Russia at first connive with Hitler, as if with Hitler's battalions you could get to socialism, in the partition of Poland, and then after a 180-degree turn alongside the Western democracies, as if socialism could be a common goal of the greatest plutocracies in the world. The Soviet economy remained in its fundamental structure as it was in Stalin's time. Khrushchev Khrushchev's liberalization, more theory than reality, and the anti-demagogic nature of the technocrats taken together. Footnote 18. By anti-demagogic, Damen meant the cult of personality around sound announced by Khrushchev in 1956, have not done much to bring significant changes, or only in just a few sectors. They do, however, reveal interesting episodes in a series of superstructural crises, the political, economic, and military apparatuses, as the experience of the last few decades abundantly demonstrate. We need to make a clear class distinction between the time which could be defined as that of Lenin and that which began with Stalin, and which has continued without deep or substantial modification by his successors. The time of Lenin, from the October Revolution to the start of the new economic policy, is characterized by the worker state based on the Soviets and the Communist Party, and all based on the armed forces of the working class. The working class exercised its own dictatorship, even though facing obstacles and difficulties of every kind. These were provoked by the temporary halt of the offensive of the forces of the international proletariat and the immediate prospect of a concrete revolutionary extension across Europe. In order to stay on course towards socialist objectives, the dictatorship made concessions to a class enemy as an indispensable short-term tactic within the strategic vision of returning to the revolutionary offensive. In the big picture of Lenin's time, state capitalism represented a calculated risk of a sought-after and temporary break with the objective needs of the market economy, which, though restricted, was fraught with danger. The market was controlled by the state of the dictatorship, in which the game of supply and demand, the function of capital, profit itself, and the use of surplus value were marginal features, and regulated in the general interest of the socialist economy itself. These fundamentally important reasons, acquired by the revolutionary vanguard since the beginning of the process of degeneration, have been the basis of its struggle. This was originally articulated through open denunciation, then through its organizational and political separation. First in the work of the left fraction, then in the party. In the process of defining itself as a party, it rediscovered the basis of revolutionary communism and internationalism. And we got footnotes. The fraction of the International Communist Left, which published Bilan and Prometeo, amongst other journals in France and Belgium in the 1930s, and the International Communist Party, founded in 1943. That's what we have been reading, at least the Il Perito section, because as organic centralism is so effective, there's actually 4 iterations of the International Communist Party, and then Damen himself is from the International Communist Tendency, and then there's another one as well beyond that, which I can't remember the name of. Continuing. We are not concealing the fact that within these problems we have raised a line of political coherence, emerged and developed, which must appear for what it is. It cannot be silenced nor distorted by the arbitrary superimpositions of a misfactory character on it. And this has been and still is our finest, even if most thankless battle. To each his own, we need to recognize in Bordiga a logical coherence in his attitude, which began with his silent obstructionism in the Central Committee after the Lions Congress in 1926. So this says Bordiga decided not to speak anymore in the Central Committee after the Lions Congress because he thought there was nothing more he could do there. He had been re-elected to the Central Committee against his will. And then after the Lions Congress, footnote, unable to meet in Italy, the Third Congress of the PCDI took place at Lyons, January 1926. In it, the left were defeated and isolated as a fraction in the PCDI and the International. Gramsci achieved this by threatening the delegates who were paid party officials that they would lose their party jobs if they voted for the left. The votes of absent delegates were counted for the Gramsci faction. Wow, this is ridiculous right here, but okay. Bordiga and ridiculous as in this should not be the case in any functioning system. Bordiga and Venegoni were threatened with expulsion if they did not take up their seats on the Central Committee to represent the left. Bordiga was elected one of the delegates of the PCDI to the 6th and large executive of the Communist International. So for Bordiga's speech, there's the the leftcom.org or the Communist Left in the Third International. Okay. Continuing. And found its natural conclusion in the letter/testament addressed. It was no accident to Terracini. So Umberto Terracini, 1895 to 1983, founded Ordine Nuovo with Gramsci. He was part of the first executive committee of the PCDI in 1921 with Bordiga, Raposi, Forticiari, and Gricio, who were all members of the absentationist fraction. In 1947, he was behind an opposition within the PCI, which the Communist Left at the time described as a purely personal attempt to replace Togliatti as leader. The letter of Bordiga to Terracini was sent on March 4th, 1969. Back to the text. This discussion of ours may seem, on a sentimental level, bitter and perhaps inhuman, but we are referring here to the value Marxists give to the role of human beings in the ups and downs of history, and we are sure to interpret the profound meaning of the teachings of Bordiga himself. He wanted the interests of revolutionary action to be above any political ideological byproduct, and that includes degenerated Bordigism. And that is the text. So there wasn't much that we put down for Bordiga's limitations in our research on the actual character of the worker organization. That's to say, the party. There's a lot of stuff where Damen essentially goes in and tries to call back to the original character or the developed character of Bordiga. And when it comes to the critique, it's essentially a reminder to essentially, have a more open and wide understanding of conditions rather than focusing on immediate particular issues. Instead, focus on the base and superstructure, the economic and political totality of circumstances. And other stuff are of a personal critique of Bordiga, which isn't important to our own writing. For kind of it is, like, for example, indeed, Bordiga should not have been surly and refused to speak at the positions he was elected to, even if he didn't like being elected to them. Even if it's understandable why, right? I can fully understand being like, I don't want to be here and screw this, right? But is that really the stance that a communist should take? Especially if we're taking the position that essentially duty should be shared, right? Everybody should essentially get a turn at various things so that they learn, and so we can break up bureaucracy and so on and so forth, right? If that's the case, even if you don't like the duty that you're doing at any given time, you should shut up about and just do your freaking job, right? um, and even if we understand why. So that's not particularly important for writing down, though. So we'll leave that to its side. This is Honorado Damen's Amadeo Bordiga Beyond the Myth and Rhetoric, his eulogy, or whatever it's called. Thank you, and I will see you with the next reading.